Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to the Irish NFL Show on the Believe Network, brought to you in association with Beck. Craig Rigden here with me, Conor Brophy, for an early August roundup of some of the more significant developments we've been seeing around the league, out of training camps, some new contracts getting done, some significant injury updates, unfortunately, for the teams and the players concerned, and some actual football, Craig, or almost football being played at the Hall of Fame game, which I'm doing it a disservice here because it was actually quite an entertaining game. Which I didn't watch, I have to confess, because I try not because I didn't want to or I'm snobby about preseason football. I have this thing where if I watch too much preseason football, it just infects my outlook for the whole of the season in like a wonderfully overexcited Labrador way, where I get like I'm just fully invested in the undrafted free agent running back who's never going to see the field. I'm seeing things that are just not going to happen or not going to translate to the regular season. So I try and minimize my exposure to preseason football for that reason. That's a long-winded excuse for the fact that I didn't watch the Hall of Fame game. But it sounds like I'm the one who missed out.
Yeah, it was entertaining. Admittedly, I have not watched the entire thing. I did watch what we call highlights of it, but the highlights were exactly that, highlights. It wasn't like a NFL production where they'd stretched out 5 minutes of good stuff into 15 minutes. Like every part of it was actually really fun. I know that a lot of people saw this on paper, looked at Kenny Pickett versus Carson Beck, and thought to themselves, well, that's, a few hours I'm never going to get back. But it genuinely was exciting. Carson Beck may be showing that he could be the backup behind Jacoby Brissett and maybe even push him for some minutes towards the end of the season. I mean, I've got the stats over here. He finished on 15 of 19, 188 yards, 1 touchdown. Some of his throws, though, were absolutely phenomenal. Like, they opened it up really early with a really deep ball through to one of their rookies there, and just a great ball placement from the rookie in Beck there, and yeah, it was entertaining enough. Kenny Pickett, not the greatest kind of redemption arc for him to start a Hall of Fame game, but you were talking before we came on air about Haynes King, who didn't really show himself up either.
No, and scored that. Like, I did see the highlights of his last second stretch for the line touchdown, on which unfortunately he got injured, and that's a really bad luck for him, having had the opportunity to show what he can do. We saw him up close in Dublin, of course, when he played for Georgia Tech in the college football game here, the Aer Lingus Football Classic, not last season, but the season before. He really shone that day and helped them to the upset win against Florida State that time out. But yeah, it's a shame for him when he did get the chance to shine and grabbed it literally with both hands and one outstretched hand. But in the act of scoring, I think he tore his hamstring, and yeah, he's going to be out for a while.
Yeah, and like you say, it is a shame. 180 yards from him, 2 touchdowns passing, 1 rushing touchdown. Didn't really show off his legs, which a lot of people said that he was very, very good at, until that final drive where they allowed him to open up for pretty much 2 rushes for about 30 combined yards.
And which is interesting, and I guess probably deliberate there, because what you want to see from Haynes King is what he can actually do in the passing game, right? Because we know what he can do with his legs. I mean, that's all he did for Georgia Tech that day. So I do him a disservice, because he did obviously spray the ball around as well, but he was electric in the running game, and would prove too much for FSU to handle with a remodeled defense that just got shredded by him. And that was what I remember mostly. He was doing Jackson Dart things out there and putting himself in danger, like lowering the shoulder, which is all very exciting to watch, unless you're a medical practitioner or you're on the training staff. But yeah, no, it's all good fun. A strong Hall of Fame class as well this year, Craig. Drew Brees, need we say any more? Larry Fitzgerald does exactly what it says on the tin. Luke Kuechly, second youngest inductee ever at just 35. Adam Vinatieri. It's a hell of a mountain to climb for any kicker to get into the Hall of Fame. So let us not in any way underestimate what an achievement it is for Vinatieri to have managed that over the course of a career. That's some achievement. But the one maybe we should focus a little bit of attention on for a number of reasons, and not all of them positive, unfortunately, is Roger Craig, who, very emotional speech, revealed his vascular dementia diagnosis. My dad has vascular dementia, and I know exactly how that goes. My God, Roger Craig is very, very young to have a diagnosis like that. So, your heart would go out to him and his family and friends with what they'll be dealing with there. But, all, as he said himself, all is good for now. He is still Roger Craig. And like, what a legend he was. I mean, you think of that 49ers team, 3 Super Bowls, during the span where he played for them, all the stars that they had. And he's still a name that, certainly raises the hairs on the back of my neck. Like I remember him being one of the first running backs that I saw when I started getting into football that you just thought, wow, like every time this guy gets the ball, he's such a threat. I remember the strain that he used to put in to churn through extra yards, the leg drive, powering through tackles. He was unmissable.
Yeah, and this is probably where I, show my youth here a little bit. But obviously, Roger Craig wasn't a name that I really knew of, not one that I've really researched.
Do you remember him from the archive rosters on Madden? I'm guessing. Oh, is this number 33? This guy can move.
Yeah, exactly that. But I was watching the Hall of Fame speeches with my wife, and we were talking about Roger Craig, and she was like, "Oh, what was Roger Craig?" So I decided to do some digging, and I don't know if this you may sort of correct me here on what I'm about to say, but Roger Craig, when you look at his stats, the way that he played, the fact that he was one of the first kind of dual threat running backs where he was able to catch the ball and run the ball, I kind of said to her he was like the original Christian McCaffrey. Now that might be wrong, but that is how I viewed it.
Absolutely fair, and like that. And if you've seen the excellent 49ers documentary, the name of which I forget, it's so good I've forgotten the name of it. But we were watching some of it during the off season. We were chatting about it in the group. But when you look at how far ahead of its time that Bill Walsh offense was, and even deploying Roger Craig like that in the receiving game, like he was a very, at that time, a unique talent, and the kind of talent that's still sought after. We'll get to in a little bit, how the running back market is slightly exploding, at least at the top end, but only for guys who can do the kind of things that Roger Craig did. He was that prototypical, as you say, dual threat running back at a time when it was not a thing done to be firing passes at your Roger Craig, like certainly not something that you saw, say, Walter Payton do on a regular basis, or even, a little bit later, Barry Sanders.
Yeah, exactly. A player with the first player in NFL history to have 1,000 receiving yards and 1,000 rushing yards in the same season. He's 3-time Super Bowl winner as well. He went to 4 Pro Bowls. Like, you can't overlook some of these legends of the game, and it was, I think, fair to say he was overlooked for a long period of time, and maybe this induction is a little overdue.
Yeah, 30 years down the pike, as you say, and there's an irony in that Luke Kuechly's getting in at 35, as we say, the second youngest inductee ever. I mean, if you're looking at the guys on that list, and it is a strong Hall of Fame class, it does seem at the same time a massive oversight that it's taken Roger Craig so long, but great that he did get in, and best of luck to him and his family, as we were saying, with the tough journey that they'll have ahead. The other one maybe worth spending just a moment on is Drew Brees. Very long speech. He got, obviously, Sean Payton, his former coach, now Denver Broncos head coach, to do the honors, and in setting that up as well with with an introduction for him. But that's another very interesting career. And we talk about what Vinatieri had to do to get into the Hall of Fame. Yes, I look at Drew Brees, and there's maybe a plethora of quarterbacks you could throw into this category. Current player Aaron Rodgers may be one of them when we come to talk about his Hall of Fame career. In as much as I am awed by Drew Brees' achievements and I love watching him play, I always thought that he was a guy who maybe could have gotten another ring or could have done a little bit more. And with him, there's a lot of what ifs.
Yeah, I think weirdly you could kind of look at what he had and then the receivers that he had while he was there, because there were times where his leading receiver was Jimmy Graham, who, take nothing away from Jimmy Graham, who was a very good tight end. You wanted more out of his wide receivers. If you try and think back to the receivers that he had across his career, the only ones that really come to mind are Colston, and then you think of someone like Thomas as well, who he had towards the back end of his career, but not anyone who jumps out and really excites you in the way that actually you could compare Larry Fitzgerald to the fact that he had Carson Palmer, Kurt Warner, and that's it. And I think I read an article somewhere who said and a list of Washington Generals quarterbacks. Like that's the kind of that's what was throwing to Fitzpatrick. But yeah, no, the Drew Brees speech was really good. My wife's a Saints fan, so obviously it was going to be watched in our household. We had to watch it. It was the law. Um, it was the one thing that he said where he said, New Orleans, you accepted me, you embraced me, you believed in me, but more importantly, you trusted me with the soul of the city, and I would have died to protect that calling. Like, you talk about a quote there. God damn.
Yeah. And as you say, like, didn't always have the most talented receiving core around him, and certainly maximised what he had. And, that was a glorious Super Bowl win coming in the wake of Hurricane Katrina as well, and everything that meant for the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana. I think Anna would probably kill us if we didn't mention that one of the reasons why he didn't get a second ring is the worst non-call in playoffs history against the Rams. Let's not go too far into relitigating that case, but they were absolutely robbed, and he was robbed in that moment. And we won't talk about the fact that he threw a turnover at the start of overtime to kill them. But
yes.
But let's move on though and talk about the running back market, because some serious business getting done. We were talking about Roger Craig and talking about being the prototypical dual threat receiver, like Christian McCaffrey. Bijan obviously is in that mold, and he has now set the running back market. And I'm looking at the contracts that were done. So Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs as well. I'm not so sure that this is a more broadly applicable trend for the running back market. I think this is only applicable to those guys. As in, if you look in the mirror and you're not the kind of talent that Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, or Jahmyr Gibbs are, I would question whether you want to be pushing your agent to be getting some of that gold mine, because it's only there for guys who can do it all.
Yeah, and you're looking at three running backs who went way over the 1,000 rushing yard mark the last season. You look at Jonathan Taylor, who was absolutely phenomenal until Daniel Jones went down, because it was then very evident that he was going to be the outlet. And his numbers took a step backwards, but he still led the NFL in rushing touchdowns. He was third in rushing yards, over 1,500 there. Like he had an all-pro year in 2021, and he just had his best average since then across the board. Like, he really lit it up. So 2-year, $44 million for him, pretty much days after Bijan Robinson got his 3-year, $66 million deal, is phenomenal. Bijan Robinson's been a massive, massive part of that Falcons offense. Obviously, they've got Drake London there as well, so they have the advantage of having the kind of tandem there that maybe the Colts might have this year, depending on what happens there. But Jahmyr Gibbs is the big one. Obviously, he's the highest paid running back ever. Ends his holding. He was upset that others were being paid, and that kind of maybe pushed his numbers a little higher. So I'm sure he's very, very happy with a few of his peers there. But he played all 17 games. He doesn't have David Montgomery there. He is going to be the lead man. Obviously, Sonic and Knuckles is no more. So he has that dual threat ability that we were just talking about as well. He had 5 receiving touchdowns. He had career highs across the board in a year where he was still splitting carries with Montgomery, who did always take quite a lot of the rushing touchdowns as well that he could have had.
And to the point, I pulled out the running back stats from the FTN Almanac, and the defense adjusted yards above replacement, which is that great cumulative stat that kind of tries to extrapolate how much better than the average player, the truly exceptional players are, and what they add over the course of a season that, a replacement level player, and this is a term borrowed from baseball, just wouldn't get to. You look at the top 10 running back by receiving defense adjusted yards: Christian McCaffrey, number 2, Bijan Robinson, number 3, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jonathan Taylor is the number 10 on that list. Again, receiving DVOA for running backs: number 4, Bijan Robinson, number 9, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, there's a reason why these guys are being paid. It's not just that they churn up yards on the ground, they make guys miss, they produce explosive plays in the running game. They're also serious threats when they're in the open field, in the receiving game, with the yak and with the things that they can do when they are hit in stride by their quarterbacks. But a couple of other interesting bits of business getting done as well, Craig. And yeah, or rather, some of the bits of business that aren't getting done are more interesting, in that 2 of them involve important Bucs players. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Vita Vea. Maybe the Baker Mayfield story, there's been a lot of ink expended and a lot of comment around it. I think Vita Vea is fascinating, and I'm going to set out my case here before you shoot me down. And I'm aware of the sensitivities here, considering that Dexter Lawrence is now gone from the New York Giants. A true nose tackle in the NFL has serious value in the way that the league is evolving. And we talked a lot on the show, and I remember Jordan Rodrigue expounding on this at length and breaking it down for us a couple of times over the course of the last season. And it's come up more and more in the off-season conversation. I've noticed is the proliferation now of 13 personnel in the NFL. It's a much more common personnel grouping, given the success that Sean McVay in particular has had with the Rams. You saw what the Bears were doing last year under Ben Johnson and what that did to their offense. You saw both of those teams draft tight ends again, blocking tight ends, because this 13 personnel, it's creating mismatches, it's creating problems for teams in the running game. It's requiring more of the defensive line, in short. If you're going to break through, if you're going to stop the run and the creativity that's coming out of that 13 personnel grouping, it's of massive value to have a guy who can eat two blocks, is what I'm trying to say, in some, or a guy that can get penetration from the interior in the way that real standouts like Vea and Lawrence and very few others can do. I think Vita Vea is in a really strong position here. Although he's not young, he is a standout talent in a position that I believe has more value than it used to.
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue, is what you touched on there, in that he is not young, and that seems to be the sticking point with all the negotiations that are taking place. Vita Vea is 31, which, when you say not young, it makes you feel old when you talk about 31-year-olds like that. But yeah, he's now requested a trade out of there because he just doesn't feel like he's going to get paid, and it does feel a little off for the Buccaneers, who do seem maybe in recent years to be a little bit hesitant to pay some of their bigger players. I know that Mike Evans was kind of rolling on year-to-year deals towards the end of his career and having to take what they were giving him, which, wasn't peanuts, but I think it got to a point where he could have quite easily retired as a Buck if they would have maybe given him a longer contract than just that 1 year. And he's now obviously gone off to San Fran. Vea's now looking, coming off the back of a year where he's had 34 tackles, 4.5 sacks, a fumble recovery, played all 17 games. Like we said, he's entering the final year of his deal. I think that deal puts him at around about the 17th mark, or maybe even lower, in his position, which that's got to be the bugbear. And do you know what? We're going to take this back to Dexter Lawrence, but that was Dex's problem. Dexter Lawrence wasn't being paid as the top tier nose tackle. And even though he went to Cincinnati and ended up getting a very, very similar deal to what he was already getting with the Giants, it kind of opens him up to have a good season and then move on from there. So you look at the output of the two players there, they're both on those lower contracts wanting to get higher, and it makes sense that Vea wants to do it. He was drafted by the Bucks in the first round, what was it, back in 2018. So he's been there a long time. He probably wants to stay there, but his hand is now forced. He wants over 20 million a year. When you look at some of the other contracts that are being handed out to skill players who impact the game, maybe less down to down than some of these players on the front line are, and you see that with some of the offensive guards and offensive tackles that are being paid, there are still positions out there that are just not valued as much as others.
It is an interesting situation for the Bucs, where you have on both sides of the ball, Baker Mayfield on one side now and Vita Vea on the other, who are publicly disgruntled, one requesting a trade, the other one voicing his disappointment that business wasn't done. And actually, I do understand it from the Bucs' point of view, because Baker is in an interesting quandary in terms of his durability or potential, lack thereof. And I mean, like, he played the whole season last year, but he played it, as we saw from the quarterback documentary, pretty badly dinged up. And a dinged up Baker Mayfield shows up more as dinged up than a Justin Herbert or a Josh Allen do, because he's a smaller guy and he's more vulnerable, and it's a bit of an issue. He's at the wrong age profile. He's at the wrong tier, probably. He's in that really awkward in-betweeny space where you're like, is this the guy who's gonna take us on his back and win it all? However, gutsy he may be, and however much we may all have fallen in love with him over the course of the quarterback documentary, if we didn't like him already. They fell off a cliff in the back end of last season and let the Carolina Panthers, one of the worst teams ever to make the playoffs, get in. And I don't say that to slight the Panthers. Have a look at the numbers. They're literally one of the worst teams that's made the playoffs in recent times. He's got to play if he wants to earn his contract. But my long-winded point is, I'm not sure I like the look of going into the season with two of your standout guys, both publicly disgruntled. It's it has the potential to destabilize a locker room that didn't need that.
Yeah, and I do wonder a little bit with Baker Mayfield if his history kind of plays against him a little bit in the fact that he is more on that kind of Stan Darnold kind of trajectory of being okay, but never really being the top guy until he gets later on in his career. He's got that journeyman. If you were to look at someone like a Trevor Lawrence where he's been with one team, it's consistent. He's been able to show enough at times. He hasn't jumped around in the league and been a backup or, then jumped up to the starter again. Don't get me wrong. I think Baker Mayfield is phenomenal. And I would argue that he is the clear number one in that NFC South as a pure talent perspective as how it goes. But like you said, it is that drop off. And when you are the quarterback of a team, you are the de facto leader. And unfortunately, a lot of it will fit and go onto your back. And you are there to try and G the team up. And maybe there was something there that they saw that they weren't too sold on either.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason Light, the general manager, is well entitled to say there, you play the way you say you can play, and you be the guy that you tell us that you are, and we'll have no problem signing that contract, that 50 million plus, average salary per year contract once you get to that level. So let's see it on the field this season. Because I think the sticking point there was not only the average, but also that Baker was looking for potentially a 3 to 4 year deal, and the Bucs were only necessarily willing to offer a 2-year deal up front, which perhaps reflects concerns about whether Baker will be in condition to fulfill his 3 or 4 year end of the bargain at the level of performance if he keeps getting banged up in the way that he got banged up last season. A couple of other big money moves happening. Will Anderson Jr., first non-quarterback to break the 50 million a year average. When we're talking about the 50 million a year average, game wrecker, as we know. Jeffrey Simmons, arguably one of I was going to say the best defensive tackle in the league, but Aaron Donald's about to re-enter the chat, so let's see whether that conversation holds up. Darnell Wright at the Bears, most guaranteed money ever for an offensive lineman, and the evergreen Trent Williams at the 49ers, 2-year 50 million. That's actually with 48.5 million guaranteed. Good to see him getting paid because he still produces at such a high level.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you look at the age of Trent Williams and what he's able to put out there, and the fact that he is still weirdly kind of healthy in a way when you compare him to someone like Lane Johnson, who has already said this week that this is probably going to be his last year, who's struggled with injuries. The left tackle position is so important on an offensive line, and Trent Williams is one of the best out there. And you can just see, like I said, that the trenches are where people are being paid on the offensive side. Darnell Wright, again, that offensive tackle, most guaranteed money ever for an offensive lineman, is phenomenal.
And he got a huge big up from Ben Johnson, the Bears head coach, as well. He was just waxing lyrical, saying that, he remembers watching Darnell Wright when he was in college, and that was a player that he coveted when he was a coach at the Lions. This is somebody that he wanted on his line. He said, we're a right-handed offense, and what Darnell enables us to do on the right side of the field, that's why he got paid.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying, like when you've got someone like Caleb Williams, who you are literally going to be investing the next how many years in, the one thing that you want is consistency. And when you have a player of his caliber, you want your offensive line to stay together as much as possible to make sure that they can protect the quarterback and gel and get that kind of camaraderie between them. I think that's one thing that we've seen at multiple teams where they chop and change their offensive line so much that it just becomes untenable, and the quarterback behind it really struggles. And consistency is something very early that Caleb Williams is going to need going into that year 3. So I think it's a great move by the Bears, especially seeing as how good Darnell Wright is.
You talk about the importance of left tackle, particularly as the blindside protector for a right-handed quarterback. Laramie Tunsil goes down for the Commanders with a nasty-looking torn triceps injury. I mean, that's potentially all of the season gone for Tunsil, which is not only a massive blow to him, but for Jaden Daniels, the quarterback, considering the season he had, the injury bedeviled season that he had last year. You did not want to see Jaden Daniels, most important protector, go down with injury. That's a really tough one for the Commanders out of training camp.
Yeah, and you look at it on multiple levels as well, because you look at it on the fact that, you know, Jaden Daniels is going to have a bounce back year to really start to show that that first year wasn't just an outlier. Like, he needs to show a little bit of consistency. One thing that has always been the knock with Jaden Daniels is the fact that he's a very slight quarterback, and you can't afford for him to be taking those big hits. And that's where Tunsil came in. Tunsil's been a really, really good left tackle throughout his years in the league as well. So now they're looking at Andrew Wiley, who's presumed as the next man up, who's going to shift from right tackle to left tackle. But I've spoken multiple times, I'm sure Kieran Boyle has as well, where that is such a hard thing to do, to shift across a line. It's a completely different setup, and it's not just a case of, oh, you're a tackle, crack on with it. Like,
Penei Sewell is the only name I can think of a guy who's successfully and seamlessly made that transition. And I'm an emphasis on the seamless bit. There's guys who get there, but at the expense of, getting absolutely blown away by edge rushers and having their quarterback smoked while they're learning their vital lessons.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a real tough one for them. I think actually it's also a tough one for the Commanders front office. And I know this is kind of a little, boo-hoo, man with money loses money thing, but they signed him to a 30 million per year contract. He was his NFL's first 30 million per year offensive lineman. That was only 5 months ago, and now they're going to have all of that cap essentially sitting there on the bench recovering, because if he does return this year, chances are it will be very late in the season, and you're only actually going to have him return if you are near to the playoffs or in the playoffs. Like, if their season's floundering, Tunsil shut down for the year, we start again in 2027.
Yeah, that's tough, as you say. A couple of other significant injuries from training camp. The 49ers, and in particular the Ricky Pearsall injury curse, continues. He's on IR now with a serious looking injury. You have George Kittle returning from injury. You have Brandon Ayuk also dealing with injury. You have obviously Juwan Jennings out of town. 49ers didn't have bad luck; they'd have no luck at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and the replacement for Ricky Pearsall obviously is Deebo Samuel, who we've seen now come into the 49ers, or back to the 49ers, shall we say, who's going to be there. And when I was talking to Adam Rank last week about that, he was saying that this kind of almost boosts Christian McCaffrey's outlook on the season from a fantasy perspective, because he's entitled to see more share now. But the problem is Christian McCaffrey.
Sorry, fucking fantasy football heads are such vultures. Like the way the delight on people's faces when the WR2 goes down and they're like, oh, next guy up. I'm gonna grab the next guy up. Get me some Alameda Zacchaeus wherever he's at.
And the thing is, though, is that, and I think this is something we keep forgetting about because we just wax lyrical about him all the time, but Christian McCaffrey has had some injuries himself and is not getting any younger. Like, you forget how long he's actually been in the league, McCaffrey. So could there be something to watch there as well? As we've said, the 49ers seem to have that injury curse locked and loaded.
To loop back to the Hall of Fame conversation, and I think Christian McCaffrey is a lock. He's one of those, and it was in my head as we were talking, I didn't say it, when we were talking about Trent Williams. He's one of those guys, very few guys who I think you can make an argument has had Hall of Fame careers at two teams. He was that good at the Panthers, and now he's been that good at the Niners. Just as we almost forget, Williams was amazing when he was a Washington Redskin, as they were then at the time, before he went to the Niners. Like, these guys do not come along very often. You want to enjoy them while you have them. Like the season that McCaffrey had last year, I know you guys had an intense discussion when you were on the AV Club about whether McCaffrey, potentially was the MVP, and he was for me because of what he had to deal with and the load he had to carry for that Niners team with all the injuries that they had. But like, they maxed out everything that it's possible for him to do. I think for his own safety, you would hope that he doesn't have to have that kind of workload this year.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's always the worry with running backs as well. There's always that question: how much tread is left on the tires? How much have they been ground into the floor? And Christian McCaffrey's on the kind of cusp now, I would say.
Just one of the things I wanted to mention before we wrap, a couple of other quite serious injuries we've seen in various training camps. Kobe Bryant only just in the door for the Bears, having joined from the Super Bowl winning Seattle Seahawks, went down. He's out for 8 to 10 weeks after a clash with Tyreek Stevenson. Again, just your one of those things that happens in football. Two guys going up for a ball. They both actually come down banged up from that one. Luther Burden, another Bears injury. Some of these training camps look, and I was listening to two Bears beat writers talking about this on another podcast during the week. Like, they were saying that the Bears training camp last year was the most physical that they can remember in about 10 or 15 years. That Ben Johnson really wanted to put down a mark. And he's mentioned in being asked questions at his press conferences post training camp how the physicality of the training camp was something that they were very focused on, and that they wanted to, set down their identity very early. It's interesting because, by contrast, I know this has come up a few times, people talking about Mike McCarthy setting down a marker about, not wanting to overdo it in training camp, in contrast perhaps to the way Mike Tomlin used to approach the training camp. Like, you hear old school players and they're like, oh, we used to do 2-a-days in pads. Like, what are they talking about? The game's gone soft. But there is a real tightrope to be walked between a training camp that prepares players sufficiently for the rigors of regular season action. And you see teams that are notoriously slow starters, looking at you, Cincinnati Bengals. And, I wonder sometimes if a camp in which guys are getting knocked around is actually a contraindicator that you can be going, oh no, there'll be nobody left to play, but these guys are going to be ready to roll.
Yeah, and it is such a fine balancing act between, like you say, making sure you are game ready and making sure that you're not coming into the season limping, essentially, which there are certain teams out there who seem to have it happen every single year. And every coach is going to be different. It's going to happen. I mean, you just have to look at the Saints. I think the Saints the other day ended up with 4 injuries in the same day. And you look at it and you think to yourself, what is this? Is this a strength and conditioning issue? Is this pushing them too much on the field? Is this the players not being ready? Like, there's so many different factors behind it. And then they're talking about obviously extending the season longer and longer and more international games, which obviously,
because the reason obviously that we don't have 2-a-day pad practices and players being brutalized in training or practice, as the Americans would call it, is because the collective bargaining agreement, was reached by the players, that they put an emphasis on health and safety because of the extra load from the extra games, which, makes perfect sense. And the product is better because of it. But yeah, it's just an interesting one. I think, to your point, there's probably a distinction somewhere along the line between load management and, not overworking players versus like some of these injuries that we're talking about, and particularly, as I mentioned, the Kobe Bryant one. Like, that's 2 guys competing for a ball. That's a football injury. Like, that's not
bang.
They were doing too much. That's where I think is the interesting thing to watch. If players are coming up with non-contact injuries, that's more of a telltale sign that the load management isn't right there between what they're doing in the weights, the S&C, and what they're doing on field. But it's something that I find fascinating from year to year. Just a brief note, actually, while it crosses my mind, is the Raiders obviously going at it because Kirk Cousins and Maxx Crosby were told to sit out training because they had a scuffle. Probably got broken up quite quickly, I hope, from Kirk Cousins' perspective, because he's still in one piece. Clearly it did. But if I was the Raiders PR team, I'd be delighted about that. Low-key delighted, because it kind of sends out the strong message that the Raiders are taking it seriously. They have to improve. They have to show a bit of moxie. They got a new coach in there, Clint Kubiak, obviously. Like, good to see them. I think if you're a Raiders fan, you're happy to see that both of these guys are snapping at each other and they got a bit of bite, and maybe characteristic for Crosby, not necessarily something you would have expected from Kirk O'Chains.
Kirk O'Chains, coming out with the "you like that" right in Crosby's face by the sounds of things. From all intents purposes, it looks like essentially Cousins was trying to throw the ball and Crosby batted it down twice. And for some reason, Kirk Cousins went, "How dare you do your job? How dare you, Maxx Crosby, do your job and bat the ball down?
I'm trying to throw a 6-yard pass short of the sticks on 3rd down. What are you doing?"
And apparently it was the second time it happened that Kirk Cousins just flipped into serial killer mode and decided that he was just going to go for Crosby. Apparently got into his face, grabbed his jersey, and then people separated. Like, Maxx Crosby has previous in joint practices of not holding back when he thinks he's been wronged. So fair play to him, because he must have shown a little bit of restraint for Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins maybe a little bit threatened by the Mendoza chat and wants to kind of maybe fire himself up a little bit and show Mendoza this is what you have to put up with. I don't know, but yeah, there's
But I'll say it again: if I'm the Raiders coaching staff and I'm the PR team, I'm delighted. Like, that's sending out a very strong message about where we're at and what we plan for the season ahead. So when they only end up with 2 wins, obviously you can completely discount that as an indicator.
Clint Kubiak as well, obviously coming off as the disciplinarian here of saying, right, you both got to sit out. That's enough of that. He would not be doing that week 7. Let's put it this way. Like, he is doing this in training camp, and he will make an example to make him feel a bit better, make him look like the big dog in the building. But you know full well that that's being brushed under the carpet behind closed doors.
100%. Craig, there we leave it. Thanks for listening to us on the Irish NFL Show on the Believe Network. Remember to like or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.